Good morning. Welcome. I'm Michael Lumpkin, Director of AFI Festivals. Thanks for joining us for the first day, the first session of this year's AFI DOCS Forum. We have a great lineup of sessions starting today through Sunday. You can check it out online in our printed festival guide. I want to thank our content and programming partners for the forum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and Meet the Press for their help in putting together this year's program. I also want to thank our programmers who have really done all of the work of putting together all of these sessions over the next 4 days. That's Kathy Lowe, who has programmed our session sponsored by CPB, and Ken Jacobson in the back for putting all of this together for us once again. So thanks to Kathy and Ken. So it's kind of become a tradition that we start out with talking about funding. I don't know why, but that's always a starting point for documentary filmmakers and documentary filmmaking. So I think it's a great way to start. Today we have an expert in funding, in how all of this works. We've been at it. We've been through decades of working in this this great and wonderful field, and it's my pleasure to turn it over to the moderator for today, Debbie Zimmerman.
Oops. Thanks, Michael. It's really decades. I think it's more than 3 decades. Anyway, I'm really happy to be here. I love coming to AFI DOCS. I think this is the 3rd year in a row that I've done a panel here. But this one, and actually from a marketing perspective, I think it's really smart to start with funding since everybody comes to the funding panel. So you could do it at 9 o'clock in the morning. Because what do we need as filmmakers? We all need money. This is a great panel, not just because the panelists are great, but because I love the idea of the panel, that we're not just looking at funding, but we're looking at the way that funding is supporting filmmakers as well as their films. Filmmaker sustainability has become a real buzzword over the last couple of years. And I think the idea of that is that we really need to be supporting filmmakers. Sorry, I have a sore throat, so my voice is a little whatever. So we need to be supporting filmmakers in many, many different ways, especially with the increasing commercialization of documentary and the concerns about investments and the way that filmmakers get paid, don't get paid, and when they get paid. So that's my little intro. I'm going to intro each of the panelists and ask them to talk a bit about what they do, how they do it, what their fund is, and of course, in the context of how it supports both the filmmaker and the project. And we'll go one by one, and we'll leave lots and lots of time for questions, so that'll come at the end. So, and for those of you who don't know, I'm the executive director of Women Make Movies, which is a nonprofit organization that supports women filmmakers based in New York. And we support filmmakers through production assistance, helping them get funds for their films, and sponsoring those grants, as well as distributing them. So, to my left is Lois Vossen, somebody that I've known for almost as long as Michael, but maybe 2.5 decades. And I told everybody that all of the panelists, that I was going to tell you something a little quirky about each of them, not just their normal, regular bio. Lois has been with ITVS, with Independent Lens, the signature program strand on ITVS since its inception. And before that, she was actually with the Sundance Labs and the managing director of Sundance, which I didn't know, which John is going to be talking about. But the quirky thing that I know about Lois is that she really loves Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. True?
It is true. I do listen to Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me.
Every time I hear it, I think of Lois.
Paula Poundstone is my favorite.
Paula Poundstone.
Yeah, that's why I became a devotee. When she's not on, it's not as good, but I do love her.
Well, I'll think of that now when I hear it. Anyway, Lois is going to tell us about ITVS. We all know ITVS, but we're going to hear more about what they can do for us.
So quickly, who in the room has heard of ITVS? So pretty much everybody.
I'm sorry. Lois, forgive me. I
Yes.
want to say one thing. I just want to mention one film that ITVS has recently aired, Independent Lens aired, which I think is extraordinary, and I just want to give it a plug. I'm going to mention one film that all of you have been involved with, but the one from you does not come from Women Make Movies. The other ones do. It's I Am Not Your Negro.
Oh, thank you. Thank
The
you.
film about James Baldwin.
Thanks. Very proud of that film. It was great working with Raoul for 5 years on that film. Anyhow, so you know about ITVS. You know that it's been around for about 26, 27 years now. We are primarily, our source for funding is through ITVS Open Call, but we also have a small commissioning fund where all the series on PBS can go to ITVS and try to get commissioning. So POV, American Masters, Frontline, all of the different strands on PBS will come to ITVS. And it also allows Independent Lens to do a very limited amount of commissioning. For example, I Am Not Your Negro was commissioned, and Trapped, and Tower, Newtown, Black Panthers are some of the films I commissioned directly for Independent Lens. The ITVS money is public money, as is the case with some of my other colleagues on the panel, which means that the strings attached are that your film will go to PBS. It will air somewhere within the PBS system. Most of the films that come out of ITVS air on POV or Independent Lens, but some of them end up on the World Channel or America Reframed. There are lots of different options. We have a funding round coming up in July. Applications will open in about a week and a half, and the deadline will be at the end of July. I don't want to repeat things that people already know, so I think what I would pivot to very quickly is that we have a new initiative called Indie Lens Storycast and a digital open call. And what we're very much trying to do is move our content, which is mission-driven, with a mandate on diversity and very happily a deep commitment to women filmmakers and filmmakers of color. 72% of the money we gave out last year went to filmmakers of color, and 51% went to women filmmakers. And that continues to be our mandate and has always been our mandate for 26 years. But now we want to get that content on digital. And we can't show our long-form features for a long time on digital because you, the filmmakers, retain those rights. We understand that in the crazy marketplace right now, you can hopefully make a little bit of money on digital, although as we know, Netflix isn't buying, and then they are buying, and then they're not buying, and then Amazon's buying, and then they're not buying. So it's a crazy world. We're trying to create short-form docuseries, 1-part, 2-part, 5-part, that are 4 to 5 minute episodes, and to really create a new channel for the content we support. And so Indie Lens Storycast launched last fall. We have so far put out 5 docuseries, short docuseries, and we are just funded 9 more pilots. And so I would encourage those of you who want to work in the digital space to check that out on our website. It does require a different filmmaking tactic. It's not long-form content that you just make shorter. There's a whole different way of thinking about short-form content, but we're really eager to help filmmakers move into that arena. And then we also have a very small journalism initiative where we're working with some of our filmmakers to create short pieces that we work with legacy journalism outlets, the New York Times, Washington Post, Salon.com, Mother Jones, etc., to get that content out as a way of driving people back to the long-form documentaries when they're broadcast on Independent Lens. So those are just a few new initiatives that we have going that I would encourage you to think about and either go to our website and read more about them or follow up.
Great. I have a couple of questions. Maybe you could explain what exactly you mean by commission. When you say that you commission a film, how is that different from open call, I assume? So that's the first question.
Great question. So open call, again, because it's public funds, we are mandated and want to have an open fund where anybody can apply. You don't have to know me or any of my colleagues. And so we get about 800 submissions a year, and a panel of your peers, a panel of independent filmmakers and a public television programmer come together and decide what will get funded. So that's the open call process. Because it's a democratic process, it also takes a lot of time. I tell people it's like our democracy, very messy, and it takes a long time. And sometimes you get results that, no, I'm kidding. I won't get into a political space already. But anywho, commissioning is where a filmmaker approaches me directly and says, I want to fund this film, and they don't have to go through the open call process. I bring them into ITVS and commission the film directly. I wish I could do it for many more films, but I only have a very tiny number of films, usually 4 a year, that I can commission. Some of the ones I mentioned earlier, and we have several in production right now.
And do filmmakers come to you for commission, or do you go to them?
Mostly, well, it's a bit of both, but mostly they come to me. I mean, in the case of I Am Not Your Negro, I had always wanted to do a doc on James Baldwin. I'm an English major, and I love his writing. It's been a touchstone in my life. And when I met Raul, he said, I'm working on a James Baldwin. And so it was just like, yes, let's work together. You know, and it's everything from Keith Maitland pitched me Tower in a bar in Austin during South by Southwest. And I could literally see the film in my head. And I was like, yes, let's do this. Other times people come to me with
Keith was a first-time long-form documentary filmmaker.
It was his second.
His second.
Yeah. And other times it's, you know, filmmakers come to me with a rough cut. So it really varies. Everything from an idea to not even an idea on paper to a rough cut.
And when is the best time to apply to open call? I mean, we've had projects that have applied. I think this is just important for people to know. We've had projects that have applied 7 times and gotten funding on the 7th round.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite things to say to filmmakers is no is just a means to yes. So.
It's so funny you should say that. Jim Yee, our former executive director, told me when I first started at ITVS, no just means not yes yet. Yeah. So I do tell filmmakers, we do every round fund somebody who's applied for the first time. And every round we fund somebody who's applied for the 4th or 5th time. Because what happens is you guys keep working on your projects and they get better and stronger. And the reality is you're competing against each other, sadly, for a limited fund of money. And your colleagues, filmmakers who are on that panel, are looking at your material and deciding what they think fits our mission the best, what's missing from the zeitgeist of public television, and what do they think will make a great, compelling film. And so oftentimes when filmmakers come back the 2nd or 3rd or 4th time, their reel is much stronger, their treatment is much stronger, and truthfully, they've raised a little bit of money, so we have confidence that when we come in with finishing funds, you're going to be able to finish the film. Because we fund up to $350,000, which used to be a lot of money, but now with budgets getting to be $1.2 million routinely, we're leveraging, you know, we're a source of leveraging funding or finishing funds. So we, as all funders, like to be comfortable knowing that you are going to be able to finish the film.
Great. Thanks, Lois. Okay, so our next speaker is John. Oh, now I'm going to pronounce it wrong after Cardellino, who is the producer of the Art of Nonfiction Initiative at the Sundance Institute Documentary Film Program. And I don't know John. I've just met him. I really tried to find something quirky about him, but what's quirky about him is that there is almost nothing online about him.
Non-quirk.
He is a mystery man. The only thing I could find was that's right. The only thing I could find was a bio of his mother that said that she has a son named John who went to Temple University, and he has a brother. So that's all I know about him. But I did find out today that he, like I, am a lifer, which means that he actually came to Sundance out of school. I came to Women Make Movies out of school. We've never had any other lives. So he knows lots about Sundance.
So true.
So thanks for being here, John.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. Hi, I'm John. I work for the Sundance Documentary Film Program. As Debbie mentioned, I oversee the Art of Nonfiction Initiative, which was established in 2015, which is, I'll get to that in a second, but above that is the Sundance Documentary Film Program, which is a funding entity I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, and there are some supported artists that I'm seeing right now in the audience. Hello. And the documentary film program operates as a year-round institutional funding wing of the Sundance Institute, providing grants to documentary filmmakers in the stages of development, production, and post-production. The application process is a year-round rolling one. You can apply at any time. Where else to begin? In addition to the funding that we provide in development and production and post-production, we have a very robust artist support program through labs and through a kind of continued collaboration with the filmmakers that we fund throughout the creative duration of their filmmaking process, which is a big aspect that we focus on when we wind up funding a filmmaker.
So, you know, John, the film that I wanted to call out for you, and maybe you could use this as a little bit of a case study in terms of how much you get involved with the film. And I don't know how much you did, but I assume since this one took years and years to make, that you did, and that's Yancey Ford's film Strong Island,
Oh,
which
yeah, of course.
actually came out of the Women Make Movies program and was nominated for an Academy Award. So what does that mean that you will kind of support the project?
Yeah.
Or support the filmmaker, rather?
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember the exact year, but Yancey was an attendee to our Edit and Story Lab in, I think, 2013 or 2014. And so that is a kind of direct example of a kind of formal support opportunity that we could provide to a filmmaker who has received a grant
So she
from
got
the
a grant.
documentary film.
So she got a grant from DFP.
He did, yeah.
He did, yes, sorry. Yeah. When he started in the program at Women Make Movies, he was a she, so forgive me. But yes, so he started with a grant. Was it a development grant or production grant? Post-production, do you remember?
I believe we did support Yancey in development and production,
Right.
/ post-production. So the way that we fund is in two buckets. One is we will either provide a development grant, but then production and post-production
Right.
are kind of within each other. It's not three separate categories.
Great.
So we provided Yancey a grant in both development and production and post-production.
And then at some point, he went to the lab, to the Edit and Story Lab.
Yeah.
Okay. So this new initiative, the Art of Nonfiction,
Yeah.
which is only a couple of years old, I think, was Yancey part of that?
We just gave Yancey a grant as a part of this past year's funding entity of Art of Nonfiction. So Art of Nonfiction is a program that was established in 2015 that, in terms of the Sundance Documentary Film Program, the primary point of support in which we fund artists is through the project-based, year-round open call kind of application process, similar to open call and, but in 2015, we established this artist-based opportunity, Art of Nonfiction, which is currently comprised of a fellowship and a fund. And the kind of primary mission of Art of Nonfiction is to be supporting the creative process of boundary-pushing nonfiction filmmakers. So this past year, so 3 years ago, we established the fellowship, so we're currently in the third year. 2 years ago, we established a funding entity in which we're providing these boundary-pushing nonfiction filmmakers, ideally early-stage development grants that are artist-based, to allow them to focus on their creative practice and their creative process, so it's not tied to the delivery of a particular project. It is more so kind of a artist-based, project-based grant, if you will. So in this past year, Yancey was one of 5 filmmakers that we provided a fund grant to. And then the fellowship is comprised of a direct-to-artist grant that can be used however they want. And the fellows then also participate in a year-long fellowship that is built to be responsive to their creative aspirations and challenges.
Okay, so it's
a lot, I know.
Yeah, that's a lot. Okay, let's just break it down. So generally, fellowships are not grants for projects. They're grants for people. They're grants for artists to do the work that they do. Again, generally not tied to any particular film, but really to support the artist. Like New York Foundation for the Arts, for example, has had a long-time fellowship program. So this is when you say that somebody got a fellowship, that's what you're talking about.
Yes.
And then they can also receive a grant for a particular project that they're working on.
Yeah,
not?
so in terms of art of nonfiction, it's a kind of invite-only curated application process. So it's not an open call process like the documentary film programs fund. It is something that is based on our internal research and tracking, as well as a very kind of robust and engaged recommendations process in which we reach out to individuals in the field about what the opportunity is and who they think might be a good fit for it.
So I have a couple of questions. One, you know, filmmakers are always asking me, when should they apply to the open call at Sundance?
Yeah.
You know, should they apply for development? Should they wait till the project is more developed? So yeah, that's my first question.
Yeah, we've been thinking a lot about that. And a few years ago is when we shifted from a deadline-oriented application process of spring and a fall round to the open call process. And that was primarily in response to trying to to engage in that dialogue with filmmakers, to create a system in which they can be coming to us at what we call the right time. Because it is so highly competitive. We similarly get between 800 and 1,000 applications a year, and yearly we give between 40 and 50 grants.
Right.
So the percentages are tough, and we, rather than having those particular deadlines that filmmakers had to kind of really gun towards, we wanted to open it up so that filmmakers could be coming to us at that right time. So what is that right time yeah, I think in terms of development, I think we're looking for access, we're looking for story, we're looking for vision, we're looking for voice, and I think that goes not just development, that goes throughout all the projects that we're looking at and that we're considering and that we're thinking about funding. But in terms of thinking about the right time to apply, we've been thinking about how can we be moving up our support so that we're not just coming in towards the end of a production process so that everything has already been done and we can provide, because while ITVS provides such a massive chunk of somebody's budget, for our development grants, they're between $10,000 and $25,000, and for our production grants, they're between, right now, between $25,000 and $50,000. So it's not gonna bridge your gap. But we've been asking ourselves, how can we be providing and focusing on optimally catalytic points that we can jump in and really help people along their way, which has forced us to really, not forced us, which we have considered and decided that we're much more attracted at this point to coming on at earlier stages of production and trying to think about how can we be funding filmmakers that earlier in development and kind of collaborating them and trusting where they're trying to go, as opposed to being in the position of prove it. More so like a kind of risk-taking approach over a risk-adversity approach. Yeah.
Okay, I just have one quick question. I don't know the answer to this, so I'm taking the opportunity to ask it. Does it always go that filmmakers get a grant and then go to the lab, or can you go to the lab first and then get a grant?
Yeah, over the course of, for as long as I can remember, that trajectory was the former, in which,
so it's additional support for filmmakers that you've already funded.
Exactly. Once you receive the grant, then you become eligible for the kind of menu of support opportunities, if you will. But this year was actually the first year that we opened up our edit lab to be an application process.
Good to know.
Yeah, so we're currently in the midst of programming that edit lab, and that was also in response to kind of opening up to the field and kind of just understanding that in terms of where people find themselves, to open it up so that they can apply for that opportunity at that right time was something that we were really interested in doing, and I think it's been really successful thus
I would
far.
encourage everybody to look into that, because we've had so many filmmakers that have gone through that lab, and it's been really, really helpful to them.
And in addition to that edit lab, we also have a producing lab. We have a creative producing summit.
We also one with composers and music.
We have a music and sound design lab that takes place at Skywalker Sound in Northern California. We have a fellowship track in which we invite filmmakers who are in stages of development and production to come to the Sundance Film Festival to attend screenings, take industry meetings, and attend networking events and things of that nature. And yeah, so those are kind of the big formal points throughout the course of the year. But as I mentioned earlier, we're also very much in dialogue with these filmmakers throughout the creative duration of their project. Shout out to Kristen Feely and Enrique Pedraza and Maria Clement on our artist support team, who are very engaged and kind of continually in support with filmmakers about what they need, how we can help, how we can utilize Sundance to kind of facilitate them to achieve their vision.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Okay, so next we're going girl, boy, girl, boy, girl. That was not my idea, but I thought it worked. So next is Dana Merwin, who is the Enterprise Project Coordinator of the IDA Enterprise Fund, which is a brand new initiative funded by MacArthur. And so I don't forget, I'll just mention one film. We had a number of films that got the first round of grants last year, but one of them was Netizens, which premiered at Tribeca, a wonderful film about the internet. And when I was looking for something interesting about Dana...
There was no shortage.
There's no shortage.
I am an open book on the internet.
Well, she's worked on such films as, they're called The Hammer, Let's Go to Prison, A Date with My Gyno, I won't say more, but she's also worked on films like No Impact Man and other serious documentaries. She
Very
comes
serious,
out of...
yeah, very serious films.
She comes from Al Jazeera, America. And actually, I have to say this because I found out when I told her I was going to say something interesting about her, she also used to be a clown. So
Used
thank you,
to,
Dana.
currently, present.
Oh, presently is a clown.
Presently practicing clown.
So we only have the best people on panels here. But do tell us about the Enterprise Fund.
Sure.
I just want to give one other little introduction. Is that, you know, we're in a really amazing moment right now in terms of documentary funding. I've been doing this for so long that I remember when there were almost no funds that were geared specifically around filmmaking. You know, people got grants from the government, which we're going to hear about. They also got grants from foundations that were interested in very particular subjects, and they had to kind of craft their proposals to meet those subjects. And although filmmakers still do that, the Enterprise Fund is an example of, and the Artist Initiative are examples of projects that really are supporting filmmakers, which means that you can apply as a filmmaker. You don't have to pretend to be something else. And the Sundance Fund and also the IDA use the core application, which is a great tool that was created by Sundance and IDA, actually, so that you only have one proposal that you need to do, and you could use it for multiple places. So, Dana.
Wonderful. Thank you for that introduction. So the International Documentary Association has been around for over 30 years. I'm curious how many are members? Look at there. Awesome. So in terms of talking about IDA, I'd be remiss not to speak about the other facets when I get to the funding. There are programs, there's outreach, there's education, there's advocacy. We have a lot of talented people working in each of those facets. I myself am new to IDA. I joined 2 years ago with the initiation of the Enterprise DOC Fund, which we'll speak about today. In addition to that, we also have the grant, the Pere Lorenz grant. So together, we are now being recognized more as a funder. Before that, it was very much supporting the filmmaker through also fiscal sponsorships. So many of you probably relate to IDA in that capacity as well. So for the Enterprise DOC Fund, there are 2 calls this year. One has already passed. That was for our production grant. The inaugural round was last year. We funded 10 films, up to $100,000 in various increments. There was 50, 75, and 100 for, 11 different projects last year. And then the second call is happening now for Development Fund. We will fund probably up to 10 projects that are $15,000 each for those. The production fund is only for mid-career level filmmakers and feature films. The development fund is everything under the sun. You just have to show a proven track record in creating. We're actually pretty open to if you have any experience, like you were an editor, you were an AP, but your project for both of these type funds, the criteria is often that it needs to be a contemporary story that has showing some elements of journalistic practice. And that call is open now, along with the Pere Lorenz Fund. We were actually also very transparent on our process. It's very similar, modeled after ITVS in terms of that your peers, both journalists and filmmakers, are involved in the review process for both calls, the production and the development fund. So we are not gatekeepers. You can talk to me more after this panel or in the Q&A, but that's something we're very proud of, is that we have so many different voices and perspectives reviewing applications, and that's why it does take a minute. So right now the production grant is still in the review process, and we opened that in January with a close that deadline in April, and then we'll have announcements for those grantees in September. So that's similar to our process last year as well. Outside of the funds and those monetary amounts, the director of the fund is Carrie Lozano, and I'd be remiss not to mention her as well. She's been a filmmaker for over 20 plus years. We both come from the production side of things. As Deborah pointed out, the collection of experience is varied. So I've sat in those seats in different capacities as well. So for us to be on this side, to be managing a grant is something that is new to us, and yet we carry that experience of being a filmmaker, and the core application is something that we know alleviates a lot of the headaches, but that doesn't mean we still don't get a lot of questions about the criteria, and is my project, does it fit, and I was rejected last year, should I apply again? And so all those questions are very nuanced, and we're happy to be the human beings that are behind those questions. So for Carrie, though, one of the initiatives was going not just to be giving away a grant. She has spent the last year partnering with so many different organizations and individuals to support what doc journalism means and how to have that conversation and what resources can be provided in addition to just the funds. Three of the organizations that I wanted to highlight just in this brief introduction is the UCLA Documentary Film Legal Clinic. Dale Cohen is the director of it, and he has just announced that he'll continue partnering with our grantees, both development and production, to cover really kind of all facets of production, legal, anything from contracts to releases. And so he's been a guiding voice in that initiative. And then the Reporters Committee for the Freedom of Press, Katie Townsend, worked with three of our grantees last year, Crime and Punishment, Charm City, The Feeling of Being Watched are just three of our grantees that benefited from their consultation, really for First Amendment work. And then the third program that we were excited to partner with is FIRE, Freelance Investigative Reporters and Editors, and they've done a lot of fact-checking for some of our grantees. So that is kind of an overview of Enterprise, not only in its funding and its process, but also the continued desire to really support what it means for documentary filmmakers to understand the benefits that go along with journalistic practices.
Great.
Thank you.
Wow, I don't have any questions.
Awesome.
But I
can I drop this?
The filmmaker of Charm City is here, which also came out of our program and got an Enterprise Award grant. I don't know if the... And is coming to Independent Lens. So
well, we funded her too, and she came to our edit lab.
She should be up here. Marilyn Ness, who's an amazing producer.
Well, she came to our edit lab.
That's
shamed.
No.
Thank you,
Marilyn is a great voice on behalf of independent producers. She writes us regularly to remind us to include producers' names when we're sending out our newsletters, not just directors, and other things. So we've got a lot of respect for her. Great, thanks, Dana. So next, we're going from the West Coast back to the East Coast. And I just have to say this is something really funny that actually 10 years, I think it was around 10 years ago, David, Lois, and I were on this exact same panel at Silver Docs in Silver Springs. So it's a reunion. David Weinstein's been at the NEH for a very long time. I don't know how long. But I will say that the last time that he was on this panel, he said something that I have now repeated all over the world, which is that he really likes to hear from filmmakers. He likes for them to call him up. So remember that. He said it's kind of boring sitting there in the NEH. No, just that filmmakers are a light in his day. And I think that's so amazing that public government agency is really so open to talking with filmmakers. You've all heard of the NEH. He's going to tell you a bit about it, but let me just tell you that the kind of quirky, not so quirky thing, but I thought it was really interesting, is that David, who was a doctor, by the way, he's really Dr. Weinstein with a PhD, wrote a book on Eddie Cantor, and also on a forgotten TV network that was called the Dumont Network. Not the DuPont Network, but the Dumont Network. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So thanks for being here, David. Oh, and by the way, there's a film that's screening here that Women Make Movies got a major NEH grant for, Mr. Soul, and it's screening on Saturday.
Yeah, thank you very much, Debbie. Mr. Soul is a terrific film. Please see it if you can. It looks at the history of Ellis Hazlitt, African-American culture from the late 60s. Have most of you familiar with NEH? Some of you applied? Okay, good. One of my goals here is to get the application numbers up. As I look around the room, I notice that I am one of two people wearing a tie. And the other person wearing a tie is my colleague, George Lazopoulos. And I think part of the reason is there's this sort of sense of formality at the NEH that can be a little bit intimidating sometimes. And part of what I want to do here and just in general is make it maybe a little bit less intimidating or formidable and tell you a little bit more about what we do. We are a federal government agency. We are your tax dollars at work. We do take that seriously in terms of serving the public and doing what we can for you to make things easier. We're a major funder of documentary film. Over the last several years, each year, we've put between $5 million and $6 million into documentary film. Excuse me, we have two levels of funding. We fund development for up to about $70,000. We fund production, technically it's up to $650,000, even though we have not been able to make awards of that size recently. We've funded numerous films that have played at AFI DOCS, aired on Independent Lens, air on the PBS program strands, play the festival circuit, and you can find a list of those films on our website. Many independent filmmakers receive NEH grants in addition to the program strands and the individual PBS stations. So it's a mix of funders, but we do fund independent films and independent filmmakers. We fund mostly experienced producers and mostly experienced directors, but we can talk about what experience means also. Frequently in a one-on-one conversation, I can help you assess that. We put a lot of money into film, but our mission is to fund the humanities. Unlike some of the funders here, we're not here specifically to fund film. But given the size of the grants and the way we operate, we really do fund the infrastructure in that a number of people work on an NEH film. We have a model that's very specialized. Editors, producers, directors, camera people, researchers, production assistants, all will work on an NEH grant. It's not, what's the term, predator, producer, editor, camera person? It's not sort of one-person operations. And over time, we've really made an impact in the field and helped sustain the field through that. But we fund projects. We don't fund filmmakers. And we fund the humanities. That's really central to our mission. Again, there's nothing that says that we fund film. The humanities can encompass a range of disciplines. And the reality is most of the films that we fund are historical documentaries. Most of them have been long form, 60 minutes or longer. But like some of my colleagues here in some of the field, we are looking at funding shorter films and ways of doing that. We're looking at funding potentially virtual reality 360 films, either through the media program or a related program called Digital Projects for the Public. We are looking at other distribution platforms, including streaming, primarily online distribution, in addition to the more traditional distribution sources. But part of our mission is to get films out to the American public very broadly in as many ways as possible to reach as many people as possible. And maybe echoing Debbie's introduction, I guess I want to close by saying, call me. You can find my information online. I really do like calls. I really do like emails. If you email me, give me your phone number. It's amazing how many emails I get without a return call, and so much of filmmaking is talking to people and having that kind of conversation. So I like that. I like to talk to people. I like to listen to people. We were talking about listening earlier. That's an important part of my job as a funder also. So call me, find me. We'll talk about your film. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I just also want to mention that John actually lives in Baltimore, which a lot of people don't know. So he's very close to here. Speaking about relationships, it's great to have somebody here on the East Coast, and he doesn't mind me saying that.
I don't.
Also, David, so, you know, if somebody, it is really daunting. I'm going to be very honest. You know, when filmmakers come to us and they say, I want to apply to the NEH, the first thing that we say is, have you ever seen an NEH proposal? And if they haven't, we say, go look at one and then come back. And then, well, I'm answering my question to you, but so what do you think are the first steps that somebody needs to go through?
Call me.
That's what I was going to say. We tell them to call you.
Seriously, call me to see if it might be worth doing. It is daunting, but if you break it down, it's doable. We reduced, this is news, there were 2 levels of funding, development and production. We reduced the length of the treatment for development, so that'll make things somewhat easier to apply. But if you break it down, the body of the proposal is about 20 pages, which sounds daunting. But if you break it down into sections, it's 2 or 3 pages, and it's probably material or stuff that you've thought about anyway. So it is daunting. I don't mean to minimize it, but we have samples, we have friendly program officers, and if you break it down, it probably feels more doable. And I think it's like a lot of grants. Unfortunately, you're doing a lot of work on spec. But there's also a formula that we can help you with, and it probably goes across the board. There is a certain language, and there's a certain way to pitch even from the first call, and there's certainly a way to sort of get the language down, and that's one of the reasons why we have samples. We also read drafts of applications, as long as we receive them 6 weeks before the deadline. So it is a lot of work, but we do what we can to help make it a little bit easier and demystify it and help you figure out whether or not it's worthwhile for you to go down that road.
Yeah, I mean, I want to reiterate that because that's really amazing. I don't know of any other funder that actually says, we will read a draft of your proposal before you submit it. So that's great. That's a real help. The other thing I just want to say, because I've just been through this many times, is that before you begin the process, you do need to think about what scholars you have that you've contacted and are working with, because that's really the concept behind a humanities grant. It's a collaboration, really, between experts in the field and yourself. So, and the third thing I just want to say is that, you know, the best tool that every filmmaker has is research. You know, look at what films have been funded to get an idea if yours is the kind of film, and that's true for everybody, you know, is your film the kind of film that makes sense given who they funded in the past.
Thank you, Debbie.
Yeah, thanks, David. And last, but certainly not least, is Jax DeLuca, who is a woman. Somebody said to me last night, I'm looking for that guy from the NEA. And I said, you know, there's no guys that work at the NEA media program. It's all women.
That's amazing.
And she said, really? Isn't Jax a man? I said, no. Clearly not. So Jax actually came to the NEA about 3 years ago, is it now?
2.5.
2.5, from my home state, from New York, from a wonderful, smaller organization upstate New York called Squeaky Wheel that has supported filmmakers for many, many years. And it's really delightful to have Jax on this panel. The thing that I'm going to say about Jax is just that I happen to know that she was in Hawaii in just around the same location where the volcano that's exploding now was there. And she saw the volcano flow into the ocean. And I know that because I was with her. Jax, of course, is going to tell us about the NEA. We all know the NEA, but we don't know exactly how the NEA funds what they fund and what they're looking for and what changes are going on. So.
Great. Thanks for the introduction. We are both very saddened by the news of Big Island getting the new flow of lava. Very interesting ecosystem there. Speaking of ecosystems, let's talk about the documentary ecosystem. So first off, if you could just raise your hand if you're unfamiliar with the NEA, that might be helpful. Okay, we got a few people. Okay, so the NEA is the National Endowment for the Arts. We're also a public funder. We're right below NEH, so I could probably throw little darts at my ceiling and you might hear it. So we are one of the largest funders of the arts in the United States. We actually do fund every congressional district. There's a person in our office who does that, which is pretty exciting. Media arts is one discipline within 14 other disciplines, and that's really important to know because I think sometimes documentary crosses over many disciplines. As a public office, things have been just disciplined for many years, and it's really hard for us to backtrack from that. So we do recognize that there is very much a cross-disciplinary nature to the work that people are doing in the arts. How many people in the room here identify as a filmmaker? Great. How many of you identify as an artist? So filmmaking is an art form. I just want to remind you all that there's so many components to that. There's sound, there's the production aspects, there's everything, right? Writing. So one of the things I just would want to encourage you to think of is yourselves as artists, because there's a lot of pools of funding for artists that you might not be aware of outside of the traditional filmmaking routes. So that's one thing I would just encourage you to think of. The Alliance of Artist Communities is a service organization that provides residency, or they have a list of residency programs around the world, and many of those do support film and or sound or things like that, different components that might be helpful for your film. So anyway, the NEA is not just a funder of the arts, we're also a resource for people who are working in the arts. So use us in that way. I had a couple points that I wanted to make. But before I get to those, we, as a grant maker, we have two funding deadlines in media arts. One, which is actually coming up in July as well, and that's for production-based initiatives and professional development programs. For us, it's a little bit different than the NEH and some of the other funders here because we fund organizations that are 501c3s or universities, but we fund things like Women Make Movies and the distribution program. We fund Independent Lens. We fund the Sundance Lab programs. We fund IDA and their documentary magazine. So if you could think about how that structure is, and this is really important. People that we fund allow you guys to access those funds, so I do encourage using our recent grants portal and looking at who we funded in the past, because there might be some not the usual suspects on the list that would be in places that you might be able to apply to incubate and get parts of your film done. So we play that type of a role in this ecosystem. We don't fund individuals or fiscally sponsored projects. However, if you're working with a nonprofit and you're doing a project, you can come into us for funding. So in our first deadline, it's all about exhibitions and distribution-related opportunities. So if you guys are organizing community screening tours of your work, or if you're working with people in the general public to get your project finished, you might be able to apply. Actually, a nonprofit would apply with you as the artist that they're bringing in. So in a way, it's almost like a commissioned program, or it's an organization, you're applying through an organization that's helping the production of work in different ways. And an example of that, if you guys are around on Saturday, is we're doing another presentation called Charting Sustainable Pathways, and we will be doing a walkthrough of a case study with Dee Hibbert-Jones and Nomi Talisman in their film Last Day of Freedom. They recently received an NEA grant also to work on their next film, which is a third part of a trilogy. So they're going to walk through that, and part of that is including a little bit of how they came into us for funding. They recently got a grant where they're working with students to produce the animation for their documentary film upcoming. So there's just creative ways that you can think about coming into us that might not be the traditional sense. So for us, we do have a peer review process, and that means any of you can be a panelist to review applications. So please send us an email, let us know. We have a spot on our website where you can do that, and we're always open to that. So outside of the grants that we do offer, am I talking too much?
No.
I can't, oh. Is this too much information?
No, not
outside
at all.
of the grants that we do offer, though, one of the things that we've been doing for field building is helping people understand the conversation of sustainability and what that means for people working in the documentary field. So a little bit ago, we had partnered with the International Documentary Association on this report, which is just a helpful guide in building strategies where you guys as filmmakers can work with organizations or people in public sector to help better understand the issues that you guys are facing in terms of getting funding, finding opportunities, and maybe like leveraging more opportunities in the field throughout other disciplines to make some structures that work for you better. That sounded very vague, but in here, it's not filled with solutions to these questions, but it's actually like a jumping off point. So we've actually been helping other organizations lead the conversation in their local communities, because I think that's where this work is going to be most effective in kind of uncovering new relationships that could possibly open up new pools of support or resources in different ways. So it's really peer-to-peer relationships is one of the largest things that's coming out of this report. But IDA really 2 years ago when you guys had the Getting Real conference.
Which is coming up in September as well. I failed to mention that. Getting Real will be September 25th, and you can go to documentary.org to find out more on that.
Yeah, and that's really important because there's a lot of people working towards... So there's two different types of sustainability that we've been thinking about, I think, as a field. One is like, what does it mean to be sustainable as a filmmaker yourself? And what does it mean, though, for the entire field? And how are you thinking about that in 5 or 10 years out? And what types of structures need to get changed? Because there's a lot of inequitable distribution systems and things that are at play that you really need people to band together to change that. And it's not just in the documentary world, it's a little bit beyond. And when we talk about documentary, we do include film, television, radio, podcasts even, that's digital storytelling, immersive formats. So it's kind of a little bit of everything. But when I think traditionally we think about it, we think about just film, but it's actually so much wider than that. But we got to think about how we band together. So there's a few other initiatives that are rolling out that I think might be useful for you guys to pay attention to. One is the Documentary Producers Alliance. You guys are over there, Beth and Marilyn. They're working on different crediting guidelines and structures, and you'll see a lot from them coming out in the future. And then there's all these smaller things happening that if you go to our website, we have a page for this. And
What's the page?
The page is called, our website is really challenging to navigate sometimes.
Oh my God, don't even begin.
Yeah, it's www, no. If you go to the arts.gov and you go to media arts as a pull-down discipline, you can go right to our page and you'll say field building initiatives. Cool. It's a little bit hidden, but on there you have access to this report, which is somewhere floating around this room also. There's a stack, but we have a digital version of that. And then that kind of can help you think about your role in this ecosystem and how you can kind of be active in it. And then we also have another PDF that is other resources for the field, because oftentimes filmmakers are asking us, how can we get funding? How can you support our films? So we've put something up there, a PDF that can help walk you through it. And I can't stress enough like how much you guys can contact us also. Maybe don't... Well, I like phone calls actually now more than emails because they stack up so fast. But we're accessible. We're a public funder. We're here to work for you and other people in the community. So use us as a resource, and we're happy to help navigate that. With NEH, it's a national entity, and with NEA, it's also national. But there's state agencies that you can also tap into. So for those of you who don't know, 40% of the NEA's funding goes to state arts agencies, which also have direct funding for individual artists. And that's something that a lot of people don't think about. So for example, if you're in New York State, you could apply for individual artist grants for up to $25,000. And then there's a distribution grant that New York State Council on the Arts has, which can help fund the film festival fees as part of your film, distribution methods, the website maybe, and the outreach components that's online. So really thinking about those pipelines. So we're really working hard to try to develop stronger pipelines in the public sector. And for you guys, it's the same thing. There's also state humanities offices. So unfortunately, like, a lot of these things might not be obvious from the outside, and there's a lot of learning that needs to get done in terms of learning how to navigate these systems, and we're here for you.
It's so amazing, really. It's so great to just have that kind of interest in communication. I just want to go back, if you could because, and again, this is a question that comes to me, and I answer it in different ways, different times, depending how I feel that day. No. You know, a lot of people come to us and say, I have a film about an artist, I want to apply to the NEA. Or I have a film about a dancer or somebody in the theater, and I think this would be really good for the NEA. Are those the kinds of films that you're looking for?
Well, since we don't fund films individually.
Right, but I'm saying,
yeah.
okay, if they come to us as an organization and say, would you partner with us so that we can, one of those things that we can do together is apply to the NEA, is that the kind of...
Yes, you could, as long as the nonprofit organization has a substantial involvement in the film. So we don't actually fund fiscally supported projects. So for you guys, it's a little bit different because Women Make Movies actually does provide a lot of the support in terms of distribution and creating the professional networks and resources that would be integral to the film because you guys actually take on a producing role.
Yeah.
So that's really important for you guys to know and understanding the difference. A fiscally supported project in a general manner would just be a monetary pass-through. But if the organization that you're working with is truly a partner in the film, then by all means, really call us.
That's true, and I just want to say that we get involved with a very small number of films in a producing role, many more that we do fiscally sponsor that wouldn't be eligible for the NEA. But I'm more curious in terms of, beyond eligibility, the kinds of films that would be appropriate to get funds from the NEA. Should it be arts-based, or should it be the art of filmmaking?
It's the art of filmmaking. Okay. That's my view. I know maybe a few years back it was framed a little bit differently, but we had changed that wording to just really let people know that it's all types of film, but the real thing, the real core of it is it artfully done in a way. So it's not just like a general, I don't know, documentation of a project. It's really about the art of filmmaking, the art of storytelling, things like that. So I know all of you are really working to hone your craft in a way. So that's what people are looking at.
Okay,
thank you.
Super. Well, we have a half hour for questions, which is great. And if you don't have questions, I'll keep on asking. But let's open it up. Do we have a mic? No, we don't. No? We only have 20 minutes. Okay, and we only have 20 minutes. Wait a minute. I thought we had a half hour. I've just got the hour mark. Okay. Oh, that's right, 75 minutes. Okay, so 20 minutes, not a half hour. And I will repeat the question if you can't hear them. All the way in the back. Give them one of the mics.
We're honored to be part of the group, even though we didn't get the green light. Our friends who've been to the concert twice gave us feedback that, after their first time, they took all the amazing feedback that they gave. We just had our feedback session yesterday, and they put it all in, and they applied again. And the feedback they got then kind of pointed them back to going back to the way they were the first time. So how do you guys filmmakers, as you can tell, young filmmakers, that can be very frustrating. Yeah. So, is it just luck of the draw? I know the panel's different every time. How do you explain, what do you advise filmmakers on how to deal with that?
Well, I'll repeat the question. So she was a finalist and didn't get funded. I'm very sorry. I always tell people we didn't fund Hoop Dreams. So everybody's capable of big mistakes. But she has friends who applied. They were a finalist. They got feedback. They took that feedback when they applied the second time. Basically, they were like, actually, you should rethink about how you were looking at it earlier. We've gotten that response. I don't sit on the open call panels, so I will speak from my knowledge of it. One of the things we've done to try to alleviate that issue is we have panelists who stay on for more than one panel, so they retain the knowledge and go, oh, actually, the last time that was here, we actually talked about this, this, and this, and so now you're going to spin them back. So I think that happens far less frequently than it used to because there is some consistency with the panelists, but there is, to some extent, the luck of the draw. Things change in the ecosystem. A film on immigration might be really timely in a certain way. A film about the Dreamers, let's just say, that issue has changed so dramatically and continues to change that advice that was given 6 months ago or even 3 months ago is no longer relevant because the issue has shifted and changed. And so in order to have a film that's dynamic and actually of the moment. So I want to believe that it was something that had to do with the issue shifting and the approach that they were taking. But it could just be that two different groups of filmmakers felt that there was a different need for a different kind of storytelling.
Okay. Somebody else. Did we do such a great job? No, we didn't. Go ahead.
You did, but...
Okay.
Oh,
thanks.
thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Jack.
Hi, it's great to meet all of you guys and appreciate your comments. As a documentarian who's also very much interested in current events, as I imagine many of the filmmakers here are, one of the things that I run into in conceiving of a project is the timelines of funding through granting organizations such as yourself. For instance, on the film that I made that's here called Don't Be Nice, it was April, and if we were going to film this year or the season of poetry, we had to start shooting in May. So we couldn't apply for any grants unless we wanted to wait another year and film the next year of poetry and then miss what was happening in the country at that very moment. So we, in a way, had to shoot the film on spec and raise money later. Are any of you thinking about how you might address of-the-moment requests?
We think about this and talk about this all the time. The first thing I would reiterate is something that Jax and David both said. ITVS is also public funds, so we have a deep commitment. We take very, very seriously the fact that we have public funds and that we're the stewards of not just those funds, but a pipeline that's been around for 26 years, and we want to be around for another 26 or 56 years. So there's a lot of due diligence that comes with that. Also, being a democratic process, it does just take time. You have to send it to reviewers and then have a panel discussion. But it's probably the complaint we get the most is your process takes too long. It is why we have a small commissioning fund so that we can also activate certain things. Margaret Brown, when she made her film on the oil spill, came to me, and we had her down in Mobile a week later shooting, because we do have a small fund that we can give R&D money to. Usually when that situation happens for us, it's R&D money that we give, and then based on the results of that work, then we look at production funding.
Also, to build on that, POV just released an emergency fund for filmmakers. So that's something to think about too, and that's for up to $1,000. It's much smaller, but it actually really paints the picture that $1,000 at this point is really necessary at times, right? Because some people are really operating at that close of a point. But on top of that, I just came from a documentary film camp with Northwest Documentary, and did a panel with Alexandria Bombach and Doug Block. And there's an article that No Film School just put out that's called like 6 things to think about before shooting your documentary film. But it kind of goes into the practices that they're doing, and they're like really all about right now making a filmmaker calendar and like really projecting in advance. So even if you're not sure what projects you're working on and what you're at, you can kind of start rolling into those deadlines and thinking a year ahead. But in terms of like shorter turnaround funds, you know, eligible projects for us, if there are other organizations in the room, you guys could be doing faster turnaround production grants to artists in a way, or I guess production funds that help people produce work on a short turnaround time. So that's something that I would encourage.
I'll just jump in and say that, you know, these funds that are up here are mostly, well, they're almost all public or quasi-governmental, which means that it is going to be a pure panel process. It's going to take a long time. There are a lot of other funds that aren't, as Jax was just alluding to. For example, the Catapult Fund, which is actually for projects to develop trailers. And filmmakers really have to have a real diversity of funding sources in their projects. So this is longer term funding. in smaller cases, there's a little bit of development money. But the reality, by the way, and I think this is another really big sustainability issue for filmmakers, is that for the most part, they are paying for their research and development. They are developing their projects and then getting them to a stage where they can actually get funding. And we, as a field, we need to be dealing with that.
It also, excuse me, it also gets to a broader issue about how different organizations fund projects and who has the power to commission or give the green light. And I think, echoing what my colleagues have said here, as a government funder, we have peer review. Let me know if you're interested in serving as a potential peer review panelist. But it's a several-month process, and I am one part of a larger process. Blazing Saddles was on TV late the other night. Mungo just pawn a larger game or something, if any of you get that reference. But I'm part of a much larger system. And there are other funds, there are other, broadcasters where you get the right person, they can give the green light and write you a check. That's not how the NEH works necessarily. And a lot of times people will sort of pitch me rather than having a conversation. Well, I have this film about such and such. Okay, this is what you might want to do. We have a peer review panel, and then I'll get sort of the pitch back. And part of the art of the pitch or that conversation is sort of listening to the program officer, trying to get a sense, especially early, as to how the organization works and really how to unlock those funds, because it really does vary a lot from organization to organization. And Jax, were you going to recommend another resource?
Oh, yeah. POV, I believe, has a filmmaker calendar. And I think that that's a really useful resource that if you just look, it already has a calendar made of a lot of major deadlines that might be helpful. Some might be shorter timelines than the other. But David, you have a really good point, though, about approaching public media in different ways, or thinking a little bit creatively about that, where to get those production funds on a short turnaround time.
Doc Society also has a very robust online filmmaker resource guide. And also, just to jump in about the Sundance Documentary Film Program, we also are really considering that very point that you're bringing up. And we've been working to create a larger discretionary pot within the funding that we're getting out the door. So in terms of applying to the fund, it usually does take between 3 to 5 months to hear back. But we do have this discretionary pot for those kind of urgent, responsive the urgent and responsive funding possibilities of individual, but it usually is based in filmmakers who have access to a very this is happening now, and this is
and will never happen again.
Exactly, and also within the context of those very quick grants that are out the door. It's not strictly this, but I think a lot of those grants are rooted in being familiar with the filmmaker's voice and knowing that they can execute what that is. It's not strictly that. You don't have to be an experienced, seasoned filmmaker for that only to receive those kinds of grants, but I will say that in seeing the success of the kind of grants that get out the door, from a funder's perspective, you want to know what you're getting involved in, and you're really taking into account the filmmaker's previous work and their capability to execute, especially if it's such a high level and important issue of the time.
If we had more time, I would ask you all to answer this question, but since we don't, I'm just going to throw out one answer to the question. The reality is that discretionary funds generally go to the people that you know. So how do you find those people that you know? And I just want to make a pitch for film festivals. That's how a lot of us find out about new talent and new filmmakers. And that's what you're talking about when you're referencing, we have to have seen we need to know the voice. So film festivals are an amazing path for first-time filmmakers.
I want to mention one online resource which we're very excited about. If you do go to documentary.org/funding, there it says other grants. And we have an Airtable database that is incredibly easy to search. So it would help you really, it's not just for our funding, and if you have grants that you're offering, we are constantly updating it. So just to help you navigate the resources that are out there that don't involve us, go there and you'll find, you'll be able to type in search patterns like that to find things like that.
I think it's important to add on to what Debbie just said, that if it's true that discretionary funds tend to go to filmmakers who we know their voice or know them, the great thing about public funds, our fund, the other funds, is they're specifically to help find new voices. And so we're very proud of the fact that we fund a lot of emerging, well-established filmmakers who've made 5 films or 20 films, but every year we fund half of our funding goes to first-time filmmakers, new filmmakers. And that's the beauty of the public process, is that we can take time to really nurture people and get them to a place where we bring new voices into the system.
But it takes longer.
It does take
does.
longer because the demand for the
trade-off.
money is so huge, but that is the trade-off.
That's right. Okay, I think we have time for one more question, because I want Ken to like me. Yes, right there.
I have a question for Jax. You worked at Squeaky Wheel. It's like they didn't say the city because hinterlands, Buffalo. Is that it?
Yep.
What's your experience of new voices coming out of that from the PEG environment? And also, the new head of the State Democratic Party in Hawaii is a former PEG station boss, Kaylee Lopez. So civics engagement coming out of the arts too. So like Squeaky Wheels or Hallwells, what kind of new voices did you find in Buffalo?
Well, right now it's a little bit different because I'm not in the city, but it's you know, there are a lot of larger organizations, and Squeaky Wheel's one of the ones that are smaller and on the ground, doing a lot of grassroots work in a very localized manner. So this is a good question, because these are kind of like feeder organizations that can help people get up to another level. At Squeaky Wheel, there's a lot of like community filmmaking initiatives, so it's a wide range of people there, but it's hard to keep track of everything right now.
Maybe you could talk to Jax about that afterwards, because I'm not sure that it's of general interest, although Buffalo is a great place. One more? Ken says one more. Way in the back there.
Hi. My name is Robin, and David, I actually met you. I did the Fannie Hamer screening with you guys.
Thank you.
So I have done a number of shorts, and I wanted to know, thank you. What is better? Because I'm hearing, Lois, you mentioned there's interest in digital and shorter. That's kind of my sweet spot, especially since my background is as a journalist. Are you seeing more of a trend towards shorter digital projects? Is it still appropriate to do feature? I mean, this is really for everybody.
Yeah, no, everybody's still doing long features, and they're getting longer and longer and longer. And
what's
now,
better to be funded, though? Go ahead, please.
I would say if you're making a feature, make it shorter. I'm not actually even half kidding. When I look at festival guides and I see 104 minutes and 113 minutes and 96 minutes and 92 minutes, my heart just always is like, oh my God. It's really hard to find an audience for those films. You just have to. I know you love your babies. I love your babies, but it's hard to find a home for those babies at that length. So I want to put a shout out for feature length makers. Think feature as in 80 to 85 minutes, really. Otherwise, maybe it's a docuseries. I think to answer your question, they're both happening. Everything's happening right now. Content is busting out in every format, in short form digital, short form docuseries, long form docuseries, but features are still obviously huge, and we're in the golden age of documentary storytelling in all lengths, on all formats.
Yeah, I would second that. First of all, I think some of my advice is, or frequently I'll suggest that people shorten their films. And I think a lot of times, but it has to do with the subject. Does the subject warrant this length? And more distribution. Will the film get out there? It's still, the short film infrastructure seems to be emerging at this point. But it seems harder to get, let's say, a 10-minute film out there than a 60-minute film. And we're looking at that. So it really depends on a lot of factors: the subject, the distribution format, the distribution mechanism, and for us especially, as Debbie mentioned, the humanities content, the humanities scholarship. So there are lots of factors, but we are looking at different options, both in terms of short form and in terms of digital.
And I just wanted to add on to that, actually, because you're mentioning format, and when selecting a format that you really are thinking about distribution. So one resource I wanted to just mention and throw out there, and I see, well, actually I don't see it right now, but there's an impact deck. It's an impact strategy deck that Dot Connector Studio put out, and that really is helpful in helping decide what type of format is appropriate for your project. And so it is kind of issue-oriented. You have to think about distribution strategy and things like that. So I think that that impact deck is really useful. If you haven't got one or heard about it, look it up.
Yeah, and avenues that I'm not sure that you're familiar with that are more based in providing the filmmaker, the artist, the chance to express themselves over a kind of commissioned content perspective. Think places like Field Division, places like The Guardian, they've been funding shorts. So I think there seems to be a growing number of avenues and supporters to be supporting filmmakers making their short work, and they're also taking into consideration how to properly, pay the filmmakers for their time.
I was going to say, though, the one thing, though, that I've noticed is they're taking that into consideration, but the money for digital is minuscule. It's a very weird thing happening in our field where we have an audience that's used to seeing digital content for free on the internet, and they don't want to pay for digital content. And so the infrastructure, I'll just give a quick example. So when we're funding these docu-series, we're the complete and full funder, and there's no revenue. There's no revenue stream. So we have to fund the whole thing because the filmmakers can't, Netflix, nobody will buy it. So that's the real gap in the marketplace right now is consumers want digital content for free. They somehow believe they should pay for it if it's on television. But if it's, so there's a big gap there in terms of financing.
And I will just use this as an opportunity to wrap up and say that's a perfect segue into the underlying issues in this panel of sustainability, because it is a toss-up between where do you get paid? How do you get paid? Do you get paid when you're making the film? Do you need to get paid from the revenue stream? And the reality is that short films are very, very tricky in terms of exactly what Lois was just saying. And I want to echo it. As a distributor, I want to echo what Jax was saying. Think about distribution and think about the best format for the film, because it is a whole different ballgame. And it is the golden age of documentary, but that also means that there's a lot more competition out there. So there's, for every positive, there's a challenge. But I know over the next couple of days, we will be talking a lot about all kinds of challenges, and we'll all learn a tremendous amount. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Ken wants to come up and tell you that they're doing an amazing thing here, which is that all of us have agreed to do micro meetings. So he's going to tell you about that.
Thanks, Debbie, and thanks, everybody. Great job. So, hi. So how many people here are here for a micro meeting? Raise your hand, please. So many, many of you. Okay. So all of these fine people are going to jump off the stage and go over into that area to host meetings with you, plus there's some other industry people who are hosting meetings. So here's the procedure. That gentleman right there is Dan. You've probably been in touch with Dan in the last few days. Dan will be checking you in along with, who's doing the check-ins? Okay. Okay, so find Dan. The meeting starts at 10, so as soon as we adjourn, you probably have a chance to grab a quick coffee right over here. Find Dan, he'll check you in. The meetings are 15 minutes. And what else, Dan? Right, so we need to clear that back room. Right, that's the other thing. So everybody in the back, we need you to please vacate the area as soon as possible. All right, thanks again to the panel. Thank you all, and we'll see you for the meetings.